Aloha mai kako. My name is Dan Ahuna. I'm your OHA trustee for the islands of Kauaʻi and ihau. Before we start, I'd like to call up our former mayor and up here to say a prayer for us to just kick it off.
Hona ni kamakua mau, ke ki me kauhane no, ke akua mau ho'o mai ka ipu, ko ke au, ko ke au. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this beautiful evening of we gather here right here in Kekaha. As we bring together our OHA team, as they present to us today some of the information for our community, we ask that all our family members, our ohana here tonight, and all of our people are here tonight to listen, to hear, to understand. We're all working together, Father, just trying to understand as we move forward for the right thing to do for our beautiful island of Kauaʻi, especially here in Kekaha. The lokahi, the unity, our kuleana responsibility, of course, keeping the kino, the health and wellness moving in our community. And this healthy discussion tonight will help us to look at options and really work together so we can really benefit the people that we serve, people, our beautiful island of Kauaʻi, and of course this beautiful side of our island. So thank you for all thy blessings. In Jesus' name we pray. Everybody say, Amen.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here. I know it's a busy schedule and the weather's really bad, and for taking the time to be here, I really appreciate it. With that, tonight we're going to be broadcasting live and also statewide. Olelo TV, Hoike TV is here, and they'll be broadcasting live tonight. You know, because of the weather, the feed could be kind of bad, but we'll have a good version for you later. So I just want to thank you all for coming and thank Hoike for being here. So just to kick it off and just to let you just dive right into it. So OHA has been hosting informational meetings throughout our āina. And these meetings have been dealing with the military land leases that it's set to expire in 2028 through 2031. So we started in early November on the Big Island, went to in Hilo, and then went to Oahu, and now we're here on Kauaʻi. And these meetings are informational meetings. A lot of what's happening with these leases involve the public land trust. So OHA wants to share what we've been doing, and you know, over months or even weeks, these we've been updating more and more and more and more. Information is always getting updated as things come to us. So before we allow you to speak, and that's why we're here, or to share your voice, we're going to do two parts first, right? We're going to have our OHA Chief Advocacy Department Paya present, and then we're going to have time for the community to come up here and speak. So I hope you guys can work with that right now. That's what we're working with. So I don't want to waste their time, but I just want to invite our Chief Advocacy to give you some information on what the Office of Hawaiian Affairs is doing regarding our military land leases. So thank you.
Aloha. Mahalo for having us tonight. I flew in from Oahu, and the flights were delayed hours and hours, so I apologize. We got started a little late. Okay. So this will be on the last slide as well. This is just a QR code if you want to register your name and your participation here. In addition to being able to give comment tonight at the end of the presentation, you can also do this online survey, and there's room to talk a little bit more if that's your preferred way to communicate with us. And we'll show this again at the end. But this is kind of the framework, and this, like Trustee Ahuna mentioned, this is the third time we're doing this, and they're available on our YouTube website. And the first one was pretty long. It was 2 hours and 15 minutes of the presentation, and because we're starting late, and that's already online, Lealoha and I are going to try and get through our presentation quicker tonight, hopefully done by 7 o'clock, so we can hear from the community and we have a little bit more time for conversation. So that's our goal, is to get to the last one down there, which is the community listening session, when we hear from all of you. But just to kind of let you know who we are, I'm actually from Kauaʻi originally. I left when I was 10 years old. I moved to Oahu, so I've lived on that island most of my life since, but I still have family here, so it's always really nice to be able to come back here. My background, I've only been at Office of Hawaiian Affairs since last November, but I was formerly a litigator at Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation and Earth Justice, doing Native Hawaiian rights and environmental law. So I have, through, as well as my personal life, through my professional life, I have experience in this realm. Although this is my first time working directly with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And what I really, my passion, similar when I was a litigator, I did a lot of community-based work. I enjoy representing community. I want to be able to elevate the voice of community. That was kind of my goal as an attorney, to fight for Hawaiian rights. So I feel lucky to continue that work here at OHA.
Mahalo and aloha kako. My name is Lealoha. I'm the new compliance advocate for the island of Hawaii for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and I've been here, started just a few months back. I recently graduated from the William S. Richardson School of Law at UH Manoa, where I received a certificate in Native Hawaiian law. And similar reasons what pushed me into going there is, should I move? Okay. Just the desire to serve the Lohui with whatever capacity that I felt that I had, talents that I could contribute as a Kanaka to our cause. I felt motivated to go and take that route, and my first job out of law school is here with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So really happy to be here and also be back home. I'm also have a lot of family ties to Kauaʻi, have lived here back and forth Oahu and some on the continent, but this is really what feels like home to me through all the places that I have lived, and strong family roots here from the east side of Kauaʻi. So that's mostly about me. And
Okay, we're moving to try and avoid the feedback. And then also, just for if folks are watching online, this is a reminder, this is a live stream. So if the quality is not that good, there will be a recording posted later that is the one that we're doing here in the room, so it might be better than the live stream. So we just, at the outset, want to share about OHA, who we are, why we're taking on this role of going out into community. So the important thing is we're here, we all care about what happens with the military leases, and we care for many reasons. Among them, these are the crown and government lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom for the most part, and these are lands that many of us have ancestral ties to, lineal ties, practices, tied to the land in so many ways. But OHA, who is OHA really? And I think many folks, like my parents' generation, remember the 1970s and really the activism around a lot of the promises that were made to Native Hawaiians and were broken, and then we're going to kind of go through that lineage tonight. But really in the 70s, we had the activism around, okay, there's DHHL lands and Hawaiians are supposed to be getting put back on the land and getting homes, and that's not happening. And the Admissions Act promised money, 1/5 or one of the 5 purposes of the Admissions Act that the Public Lands Trust is for is the betterment of the conditions of Native Hawaiians. And Hawaiians looked around in the 70s and we weren't getting any money. It was all going primarily to education at that point. And there was a lot of activism around how do we take control of what's happening, how can we hold the state and the federal government accountable to these promises that were made. And one of the outgrowths of that activism was the 1978 Constitutional Convention and the Native Hawaiian Committee that was chaired by Auntie Franchita Soto, former Governor Waihe'e, many other Aloha āina activists participated, and they got a lot of the amazing things that we have now in our Constitution, Olelo Hawaii as the second language of the state on an equal footing with English, recognition of traditional and customary practices being constitutionally protected, and also the formation of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And really that was to receive that 1/5 of the public land trust revenue that was supposed to be going to Native Hawaiians and to use it within the community. And also to really serve as a voice and an advocate for all these other Native Hawaiian rights that were being instituted at that time. And so as part of our kuleana of carrying out really what was the original purpose of OHA, this is why we are taking up this role, because we have that direct duty to the lahui to be sure that the public land trust is preserved until Native Hawaiians' unrelinquished claims to that land are resolved, and also as a recipient of any rents that would be coming from the United States military. We are the body that would receive that portion that's due to Native Hawaiians. So we have multiple fiduciary duties under law to those military lands, and then of course our fiduciary responsibility to the beneficiaries, our lahui. So OHA does a number of different things. I won't go into it. I'm sure many of you are familiar. We do grants in the community. We do, one of the big funding initiatives we had this year was with our charter schools, our Hawaiian-focused charter schools, giving funding directly to
for the upkeep of the people and for the kingdom and for profits. And then he kept a portion for himself, and that is considered the crown lands. And that was meant to be passed through the crown, the lineage, and heirs and descendants forever. But in 1865, because people were still trying to gain more of the lands, they made the crown lands inalienable. That meant that they couldn't sell them off. So that's kind of one of those things, the resentment leading up to the overthrow in 1893. There's a lot of business interests, and a lot of that is you need land, right? So you have these people that want land, and that's one of those things. So 1893, we know what happened there. The overthrow occurred, and it was these American businessmen and Dole, and so we're going to step into kind of this portion of time that's now under control of the provisional government. And what they do there is there's a Land Act in 1895 which actually merges the crown and government lands, and their intention there was so that they could start selling off those lands because the crown lands were inalienable. This becomes important later too for Queen Liliuokalani's claims later on when she was trying to get back her crown lands. And the decision there was based on this, that they were merged and no longer inalienable. I think that's correct, yeah. Okay. So that's where our crown and government lands origin comes from. And these go on to be the ceded lands, where in 1898, so there's like 5 years in between the overthrow where the American businessmen are kind of running the government until 1898, where you have the joint annexation and the federal government recognizes or attempts to, they're illegally claiming that Hawaii is a territory, but that provisional government is accepting that, and they want that to happen, right? So at that time, the crown and government lands are ceded and given to the United States, and it becomes a U.S. territory. And I'm going to let Lena Ala add more and go into that.
Yeah, so I'll say a few things about this timeline that I think we all know, but between 1893 and 1898, Native Hawaiians were organizing to protest against what was done, against the overthrow, against the attempts from the sugar interests to transfer the government to the United States. And what we have happen in that interim between 1893 and 1895 is the Kauaʻi petitions that the Native Hawaiian activists and nationalists took to Washington, D.C. and presented to the congressman there, and that was part of the delay between 1893 and 1898. I know many people are familiar with the Blount Report, which was also actually initiated by the President of the United States in 1893 to go and investigate what actually happened, because Queen Liliuokalani, of course, objected, and she ceded her power under protest and putting her trust in the United States government to do the right thing when it understood the truth of what would happen and to return the land to and the government to the Native Hawaiian people. And she sent that letter, and it was heard, and the president at the time sent James Blount to investigate. And his report in 1894, in fact, said that, this is a theft of a lawful government with which we have treaties, and it is not supported by the majority of Native Hawaiian citizens, or really the majority of citizens, Native Hawaiian and non-Native Hawaiian. It was a small oligarchy of the most powerful business interests in the kingdom, and those were the individuals responsible. So, there were other complicating factors, but that was part of the delay, was the activism. And so now, in modern times, when we get the apology resolution with the United States government recognizing the Native Hawaiians never relinquished their claims to their sovereignty and their government, part of that history part of that recognition is because of the Kauaʻi petitions and the organizing that Native Hawaiians did during that time. And the number that they calculated was approximately 97% of Native Hawaiians signed the Kauaʻi petitions to show that they were opposed to the overthrow of the government and opposed to the cession of their lands and their government to the United States government. So I think that's a really important piece of this time period. And the other thing that's significant about the merging of the Crown and the government lands is the ali'i, as Lealoha was talking about, at the time of the mahele, the ali'i did privatize the land for the purpose, not of trying to alienate land, but the opposite, to try and protect land and ensure that their people would not be deprived if a Western government was going to take over, because they knew that the Western government respected property rights, right? So the idea of instituting a private property regime is to protect Native Hawaiian lands. And that, that is part of the tragedy of the Crown lands, is particularly being taken because they were to be protected under this new system. And they were taken away by the United States government. And we know from the other ali'i trusts, ali'i at that time looked at their own lands for the benefit of the people. That's why we have Bernice Puahi Bishop Estate, right? And Kamehameha Schools, because her legacy to her people was her lands for education, and Queen Liliuokalani Trust for health and youth. And we have all the different trusts. And the ali'i at that time, including Liliuokalani, they used revenue from the Crown lands, she used her revenue to help support poor Hawaiians. So the Crown lands kind of maintained that traditional role as not a source of income for one individual like the Western property system, but a source of support for the lahui as a whole. So when the overthrow happens and when the Crown lands are taken from the Queen and merged into the government lands, it's really part of it's just part of this kind of ongoing history of dispossession. And while we have a national governance claim to all the Crown and government lands, this is why sometimes people talk specifically about how important the Crown lands are, because those should really, in fairness under Western law, stayed the property of the descendants of the monarchy, but they were taken and combined. So we can go to the, thanks. So despite all these, despite the overthrow, despite the eventual annexation, and I know many folks here know this, but the United States government was never able to achieve a treaty of annexation, in part again because of the Kauaʻi petition. So even when we have the Spanish-American War in 1898 and there's all this kind of like imperial expansion, right? Hawaii was annexed in 1898. Same time as Philippines was taken, same time as Puerto Rico was taken, it was this big imperial explosion of the United States kind of across all these different island nations. Even though we were swept up with that, we have the joint resolution of annexation because the United States was never able to get the support, 2/3 majority Congress for a treaty. So we have the joint resolution. And within the joint resolution, the Newlands Resolution, it recognizes, it basically establishes Hawaii as a colony, right? The United States takes over, they control the government. Nonetheless, even at this point, it recognizes that the public land laws of the United States would not apply to Hawaii. At this point, again, there's already that seed of recognition of what has happened and that these public lands are different from other public lands. So the Newlands Resolution does not extend U.S. law to Hawaii. And then when the Organic Act is passed a few years later to kind of formalize the territorial government structure, which again was a colony, the United States appointed our governors. There was not a lot of local control. But again, the public land laws of the United States were not extended to Hawaii, and it was made clear that any revenues would be spent locally. And we kind of, that's the seed of the beginning of recognition of kind of the trust relationship and the political status of Native Hawaiians vis-a-vis the federal government.
So actually the Organic Act and the resolution those are mainly focusing on this trust responsibility over the lands. What we see for next coming up is in 1920 with the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. This is one of the first instances where you start to see the federal government also recognize this political status with Native Hawaiians as a people and some of their rights to the land. And one of the things that I'll point out is that during Prince Kuhio advocating for this Hawaiian Homes Commission Act for there to be lands that are set aside for Hawaiians to be on, there are a couple of things that stand out to me. One is that he used the argument of that third of the people during the Mahele, the Maka'ainana, that didn't receive their portion of the lands. And so that was a big reason why that was a big argument that he had before the federal Congress, that they never received this land, we need a place to live on, and that was part of it. The other thing is that when this was argued before Congress, initially Prince Kuhio was arguing for any small sliver of Hawaiian blood means you're Hawaiian, and that it was really argued through the Congress pushing the blood quantum issue to a certain point. And it is one of those things where Hawaiians are the only group that have a blood quantum requirement compared to Native Hawaiians. And it is during the time when there was similar acts through Congress, through the federal Congress, that are recognizing Native American tribes and such, and having similar types of relationships that recognize political status of Native Americans. So that's where it kind of is coming on the heels of. But this is just basically the beginning of where you see the federal trust relationship and that political status with Native Hawaiians start to form. Then going into the Admissions Act in 1959, when we're going into statehood, this is focusing, we're bringing in all of those concepts that were in the resolution and the Organic Act that do specify that these lands are different. There are certain trust responsibilities that are owed. And so there are conditions set with the lands that are ceded, which are the Crown and government lands, which include those. And one of those conditions is for the betterment of Native Hawaiians. And that's where a lot of our OHA responsibilities start to come in, and preserving those rights and being receptacle for the proceeds of those lands. But I'm also going to give it to Lena Ala to explain more about some of how that affects the military leases and some of the provisions that were in the Admissions Act that directly affect what's going on with the leases today and the 5-year limits there, and why those all happened around the same time and why all of those leases are coming up right now.
Thank you. So I just time checked, and we're going a little longer than I wanted to, because I still do want to give the community more time to talk. So I'm going to try and speed through some of this, but and skip some of the points on the timeline here. But really, in 1959, at the time of the Admissions Act and statehood, there were the primary lands that were, they called it set aside at the time, that were set aside to the federal government. There was about 230,000 that were just for national parks. And then there was about 80,000 under lease to the U.S. government, mostly for military purposes. And then there was like these short-term licenses, like another 100,000 acres. And there were, the ones that were set aside were kind of immediately became federal property with the passage of the Admissions Act. And then there was another set of lands, the leased and the licensed lands, that there was kind of this 5-year period between 1959 and 1964 when the government, the U.S. government, could either decide to keep those lands or to give them back to the new state of Hawaii. And that's why a lot of these military leases were executed, and they're all expiring at the same time, because there was this negotiations going on between the new state, the new congressional delegation, and the U.S. military about the status of the lands. And actually, there was a provision in the Admissions Act under 5E to return land to the state of Hawaii. It was basically instructing the U.S. government to look at the lands it had under lease and license and to kind of justify why it needed it. And at the end of the period, the Hawaii congressional delegation was really disappointed, basically, because they had expected the military to return more lands than they did. So Public Law 88233 is important because it basically extended the Admissions Act and kind of put the burden on the U.S. government kind of in perpetuity, like forever into the future. If these lands that it had at the time of the Admissions Act, if they were either leasing and licensing them, they need to return them to the state of Hawaii if they ever determine that they don't need those lands anymore. And since that time, it's also become so the Department of Hawaiian Homelands actually has a right of first refusal. So this is actually an existing duty under statute that the United States government has to return these lands if it no longer needs them. And that happens once in a while. There was a tsunami center on Oahu recently that was returned to the state. But really that's an ongoing duty that the government already has. And I'm just going to really quickly, I'll just say State v. Zimmerman kind of recognizes what is stated in the 1959 Admissions Act, basically saying the state isn't an owner of the land in the traditional sense. It's a trustee for the benefit of the people of Hawaii, and it just has this, it has naked title. It's basically just a trustee. It needs to use and steward and care for the land for the benefit of the people. And what the last point I'll say about the 1978 Constitutional Convention, what was really important in, it's in Article 12, Section 4, and it makes explicit, it actually says what's implied in the Admissions Act, because one of the purposes of the Public Lands Trust under the Admissions Act is the betterment of the conditions of Native Hawaiians. So Article 12, Section 4 of the Hawaii Constitution very specifically says the beneficiaries of the Public Land Trust are the general public and Native Hawaiians. So Native Hawaiians have standing to sue for breach of trust for the state's failure to properly steward the Public Lands Trust as the trustee, again, for the public. So this is a Ching v. case. If you've heard about this, it's about the Pōhakuloa lands. And the fact that the state was not enforcing the lease terms related to the U.S. military's duties to clean the land on a regular basis and to make sure there's not unexploded ordnance just left around, and to preserve it to the best of its ability. And the Ching v. case said that the state was failing as a trustee of the land to ensure that the U.S. military was actually cleaning up and taking care of the land as it should. And Native Hawaiians have explicit standing and right to sue for breach of the public trust under Article 12, Section 4, which again is part of the same constitutional section that OHA was created under. So I'm going to skip, thank you. So this is a quick overview. I think most of you already know the EIS process was completed for Pōhakuloa, and the Board of Land and Natural Resources rejected that EIS. And they did this, and that was in May. They did the same thing in June for the Oahu military lease, and they haven't issued the final environmental impact, or the Army hasn't, or the military, I think it's the Navy, hasn't issued the final environmental impact statement for PMRF here on Kauaʻi, so it hasn't gone before the Board of Land and Natural Resources. But kind of the difference in the Army's or the military's proposal between the different islands is Pōhakuloa, they're basically proposing to keep all of it except for like 250 acres that would go back to Department of Hawaiian Homelands, but the bulk, the 20,000, they're proposing to keep. On Oahu, they actually are proposing to return the state leased lands in Makua Valley, the majority of the kahuku training area, so of 1,000 acres, they'd keep about 450 and return the rest. And then they're proposing to return the Po'amoho training area in central Oahu, which is like 800 acres. So there is a number of lands that are proposed for return on Oahu. And as mentioned, we already did a community session in Makua. We're trying to go to all the communities where there's leases, so we still have to go to Kahuku and Po'amoho. And then on Kauaʻi, there is about 8,000 acres, and they're proposing to keep it under lease or to even acquire a section of it in fee, but we don't know exactly what they're saying they want to do because they haven't issued the final EIS for the PMRF lands or their record of decision. So they're treating the lands on the different islands differently. Next slide. Yeah, I mean, I think for the purposes of time, I guess I would say just about Makua Valley, it's an example of, community activism. It's very culturally significant. There was a lawsuit in the early 2000s. They were able to successfully get an injunction against live fire training because of the Army's failure to complete a full environmental impact or adequate environmental impact statement under the National Environmental Protection Act. And they stopped live fire training, and then they just never finished the environmental impact statement, and now they're saying they don't need it. So I would say Makua Valley is an example of successful community activism.
And then Selena Ala mentioned Pōhakuloa. That's kind of one of the big top issue ones here because it's the only it's one of the biggest live fire training places in the Indo-Pacific. So lots of people use it for live fire training. Not just the Army. Sometimes they have other people training there as well, and so they don't want to give it up, obviously. And there's been there's been so much communication and like trying to work it out with Pōhakuloa. But a lot of that came after the Chingvi case, which is because of these lands where they weren't stewarding, they weren't cleaning up the lands, and that's BLNR's responsibility, as they are the land steward basically they have their public trust duties, and they're responsible for ensuring that these people under lease are cleaning up the mess that they're making, because we don't want those lands to then be transferred. We have to consider the long term, right? If it's under lease, at some point, people need to be able to walk on these lands and there not be unexploded ordinances and the cleanup. And we know how that is still an issue with Kaho'olawe that has not been fully cleaned up, and there's commitments there. So all of those things should be considered. This failed the FEIS. Several of those issues were part of it. Failing to look at the impacts of live fire training was a big issue. I know that OHA had brought up, as well as other advocates, is how continuing the leases, even though the lease, and in some of the other presentations you can go back and look online, because Chair Kahele has all these great maps in those that show it, and in the more extensive PowerPoints. But there are a portion where it is just leased land, but the owned land is where the bombing is occurring at Pōhakuloa. So, but the shooting, the live fire, is happening from the lease portion. And so how that impacts the land should be considered, and in the lease, if they're going to do a lease renewal. So that's kind of the major issues with Pōhakuloa. And so there's also a bill that the Native Hawaiian Caucus is going to be putting forth, I think, this session, that is looking to put an amendment on the ballot for a constitutional amendment. And this would ban live fire training on leased state lands. So it has to pass the legislature first, but then it would go on the ballot for people to vote on that. Say if the state continues a lease to the military, it's at the condition that there's no live fire training allowed. And a lot of that has to do with Pōhakuloa and those impacts of live fire training, but as well as all of the other areas that are doing live fire training. So we hope that came actually from the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, which presented that to OHA, and then they took that on to kind of push that, and now the Native Hawaiian Caucus is going to put that forward. So look for that upcoming too. And then we have PMRF, and so you guys probably are more experts on PMRF than us, but PMRF is a little bit different in that a lot of the lands are federally owned. Some of them are leased lands, and Kauaʻi Island, which has also been an issue with. It's off the coast. It gets bombed. They practice bombing there, but it's also federally owned. So there is some differences in what we have to hold accountable either the state or the federal government in the way that they treat the lands. And right now, so there's a lot we could talk about, and it's similar to like Kaho'olawe in the ways that we can advocate for return of lands, and we'll get into. But the main ones is that these leases are coming up, and there are a lot of portions of land that are also leased here at PMRF. And do you have anything else on this?
You know, if there's any folks who want to comment, I think we could take a break really quickly, because one of the issues that we raised in our comments is OHA. On all of these different environmental impact statements, our staff has reviewed the documents and flagged the deficiencies that we've seen in them. And kind of across the board on all three islands, you know, there's been an insufficient, I would say Pōhakuloa even more so than here. They have a lot of unsurveyed area, so they haven't adequately complied with HRS 6C, which again is a provision relating to protecting iwi kupuna and historic sites. There's just vast areas in Pōhakuloa that they haven't inventoried, so we don't know if there's resources and cultural artifacts in those areas that need to be protected. We've also asked that with all of these EISs, they do more of in-depth consultation with the community about practices that might be negatively affected through these leases, like access to cultural resources as an example. So we know at PMRF there's a cultural access program, and we have gotten some feedback from different members of the community that maybe the cultural access program there makes it difficult for folks to either visit burials on the sites or to access the coastline. So that is some of the feedback we've gotten from the community. So we would welcome now or later in public comment if anyone has feedback about the adequacy of the access that is currently allowed on the PMRF base and the ease of getting onto the land if there are different cultural resources or practices that you have. And that's also something that we have that QR code again, because again, some of that information is private and people might not want to share in public. So we have that available on that QR code. There's questions about, if there's any resources in the area that you would like to access and have difficulty with because of the control by the military, then we would welcome that feedback also through our online survey, because that's the kind of information that is important, because some of the land and a lot of the land, the Makai land, is already owned by the U.S. military. So regardless of what happens to the leased land, which is more Mauka, they're going to still have that front land. So we really do want to use the lease process to also revisit, the management of the lands that they own in fee, and even if they own them, how can they better work with the community so that these lands are still accessible and usable, even if they are held formally by the federal government. Because really the leases are just about the state-owned land, but there are significant portions, particularly in PMRF, that are already owned by the federal government. So if there's not anyone who wants to comment right now, we can keep going with the presentation. Oh, and this is just a close-up map. Can you see it here? Yeah, so the navy, the owned is kind of the this purple strip here, the Makai portion that I was talking about, and then the red crosshatch, that's this kind of little strip here, as well as the ocean area. That's the part that is the lease that they are looking to renew. And then this just spells out some of the specific issues with live fire training, which Lealoha touched upon the constitutional amendment. And I think this kind of goes without saying. I think people already intuitively know what is the problem with blowing things up and how that affects the āina, and the fact that we all have experience with the efforts to clean up Kauaʻi, and how even after $500 million or $400 million, there's still only about 75% of the island that's been surface cleared, and only 10% down to a depth of 4 feet, which is really what is the depth that it needs to be safer for continued access. So live fire has immediate impacts on the environment. There's wildfires at Pōhakuloa. I mean, there's all kinds of bad ecological consequences. There's destruction of native plants. There's the actual, pollutants that come from it in the air when there's a fire. But then it's also the long term, and the kind of the fear and the reality, as we've seen in Kauaʻi, is it's a permanent alienation. Even though it's a temporary use of land under a lease to live firebomb, it has these lasting impacts into the future. So we have an interest in trying to stop live fire bombing, and also in making sure in places like Makua, where they're promising to return the land, there's still the whole question of how much money is the federal government going to commit to clean up that land, right? Because you can say you're going to give this land at Makua back, but how accessible is it really to the community if it's not cleaned up like Kauaʻi? So that's a whole other conversation that we've commented on the different EISs that we found deficient, that the U.S. government has basically said, there's these other laws that govern cleanup of hazardous waste. So we're going to wait until the lease expires before we talk about cleanup. And one of the things we've asked for in our comments is no. If you're holding out this promise to the community that we're giving back Makua, we want to know now, what are the commitments that you're willing to make as the federal government to helping to clean up this land, so that when it comes back to the community, it's in a form that is usable. Okay, so we're going to try and go through this really quickly. 5 minutes, okay. And we've touched on some of these points, but I'll just emphasize again, Kaho'olawe kind of illustrates the full range of tools in the toolkit as far as organizing around land back, because it started out, as everyone knows, it recently was a 50-year anniversary of the occupations. So very deep community aloha āina commitment to activism. There was also a lawsuit that was filed, and there was a finding that there was not adequate environmental review, and there was an order by the court not to stop the bombing, at that time, but to minimize it to the maximum extent practicable and to make 10,000 acres available through cleanup to the PKO to be able to access the land. And through that energy and attention generated through the activism, through the lawsuit, there was eventually legislation introduced at the congressional level by Senator Akaka to establish a committee to look at what the Kaho'olawe Island Reserve Committee to look at how much money would actually be needed to return the land. And that committee made the initial recommendation for the $400 million. And then we had the presidential action under this political pressure by George Bush to actually stop the bombing. So we have these subsequent slides we can kind of move through quickly, but you see there all the different layers of community and government decision makers coalescing into the eventual return of this āina. So, and we already talked about Public Law 88233. So I guess the last thing I'll emphasize is that land back is both a short and a long-term strategy. In the case of Kaho'olawe, it took over 25 years. In the case of Makua, it's taken about the same. And we always, we want victories now, but we also have to always think alternative strategies, victories in the future. So another thing we've emphasized in our comments on the EIS is if there were to be a lease, even if that's the option of last resort, it should be the shortest lease term that it can be so that there is this opportunity for community dialogue and the opportunity for land back more than once in a generation, because 65 years is once in a generation. So that's just a way of thinking about strategy because, we can't always get the victory now, but we can help set the conditions for, eventual return in the future. This is a process we've already touched upon. The only thing I would add about lease renewal and actually lease land exchange. So these are different potential things that could happen, right? We're going through land back, we're going through lease renewal, we're going through land exchange, we're going through condemnation, and then there's also the possibility of international solutions. So these are the 5 different legal frameworks that we're trying to get through quickly here. So the only thing I'll say on this, because we've touched upon it, is that for both conditional lease renewal and land exchange, the law is written right now as the Board of Land and Natural Resources is the primary decision maker because it reviews the EIS, it looks at the adequacy, and so that is the true opportunity for public comment. So for PMRF, when the final environmental impact statement gets published, which will be happening soon, the Board of Land and Natural Resources will vote on whether to accept that. This is really the primary mechanism for your voice to be heard because in the statutory section that governs government-to-government land exchanges and leases, there is no requirement that the legislature approve it. There is for private land exchanges, but not government. So there's not currently any requirement in the law that there be a legislative hearing on whatever decision is made. So we strongly encourage you when the final EIS comes out to be sure to have your mana'o heard by the Board of Land and Natural Resources when they're considering it. Land exchange, like I said, is very similar. The board is the primary area or the primary decision maker that would be hearing feedback from the community. I would note that land exchange is not something that is formally on the table at the moment. It's not included in the EIS, but it has been raised in conversations, including by Governor Green, as far as essentially a form of compensation. If there were to be military leases that were renewed, would there be certain lands that could be returned in exchange? And clearly we wouldn't want these to be lands that they've already promised. But one idea that has been raised is, well, what about military recreational lands that they have like at Bellows on Oahu or Fort DeRussy in Waikiki, like can they, if they're going to keep our lands, can they give us lands of high value to them and also monetarily, and also ones that have, I mean, Bellows also is culturally significant. So if they're going to keep it, the lease lands is land exchange something that can provide a more meaningful form of compensation than money. And then international pathways is a lot of the community is already informed. This isn't something OHA's pursuing at the current time, but I do want to flag that many people are interested in like the decolonization pathway under international law. If that's available to Hawaii, as we talked about with the overthrow. There's also different international norms that govern just consultation with indigenous peoples like Native Hawaiians, but we also know that the international law framework is kind of at a low point right now because the U.S. is pretty much withdrawn from most international bodies that would be enforcing these pathways. And I actually think we can skip the last few slides on the different, the roles of like the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches, because we've kind of talked about that in the context of Ko'olave and other things, and we want to get to public comment. So unless Lealoha wants to add anything on these slides, I think we want to wrap it up. So
I'll just do I think a quick overview of the role we did speak about of executive, legislative, judicial branch. But I wanted to emphasize the importance of all of those things coming together. And if you look back at our history and very much in Hawaiian way of thinking in a Mokuahau lens to look back at what happened before, every time we have these successful returns of land or whatever it may be in ways that we advocate together to make things happen for Hawaiians, we need all of these roles to take a part, and it works even better when there are kanaka or people who understand this idea in all of those places, in the legislature, in the executive branch, in the judiciary, where you have decision makers, people who align with Native Hawaiian thinking and ways of thought at the same time as we have the most important part of that is the community and Native Hawaiians themselves. And so I don't want to diminish that, especially that's what we're here for. And so I kind of wanted to tie that all together, that we have these different roles, but it's so important that they are all used together to really get the goal that we're looking for as Native Hawaiians. And to me, the most important part of that is the community voice. And so anything we can do to uplift that, and that can't be done. None of this can be done, even these roles that people are in, none of it can really be done without the community continuing to unrelentingly not relinquish those vested rights that we have. And the only reason that we're still here today is because of that unrelinquished unrelenting voice that Native Hawaiians have had from the overthrow until now, and we need to continue doing that. And there are a lot of opportunities for Hawaiians to use their voice in ways to do that, and we hope that we can show you some of those paths tonight and hope to hear back from you. We are also, some of the comments that we are also doing a Kauaʻi analysis. I don't know if you mentioned that, but kind of an important part that OHA has offered to do a Kauaʻi analysis for some of these leases that the military issues that may come up, and it is important for Hawaiians to identify some of these rights, and there are different ways, in whatever ways feel comfortable doing that, but it's important for us to be able to protect the practices and the rights that we do have by identifying them through some of these pathways that are created in the structure that we have to protect those rights, and one of those is through Kauaʻi. But I'm going to turn it over, to Lena Oliver, or trustee, for this portion. Wow.
Thank you very much, the two lays here. Thank you for the presentation. It was important for them to do this presentation for you. They've been going around, and obviously you can see these issues that they faced in the past and in recent months. But now is the time that we listen to you. What's important is, and what we care is what you care about, especially in this community. So I don't want to make it really formal to where we have to write your names down. I'm okay. I trust all of you. So, and I don't want to give you guys really a time limit. But if you guys want to come up here and say something, I would like for you to take this time right now for beneficiary comments. So, you want to raise your hand? Anybody want to come up here? Anybody? Do we have to write names on the list and then call everybody? If not, here's a question. Since no one wants to come up. Is there any, oh, there it is. If you want to participate outside of this meeting and you know, we're listening either way, so you can actually use this QR code to input your beneficiary comments. So, okay, I mean, anybody else? Yeah, can we give you a mic? And then, right here. If you guys can come up.
My name is Brenda Jose, and I'm of Elepaio Road. And I just have a quick question. So after you visit all the islands, you have more to visit? Yes? So after you visit all the islands, you get all the feedback from everyone, and you organize yourself. Where do you go from here? That's my question.
Oh, great question. Also with us, who's going to be closing with us, is our CEO. She arrived. I see her in the back. Summer Silva, our interim CEO. So she's back there. She'll be closing. But I'm going to ask our chief advocate if she can answer that question.
So I appreciate the question, and Summer, I welcome you as well to give your feedback. I'll repeat the question if you didn't hear it. Brenda asked if, or after we go to each of the communities, we still have Kohuku and Po'amoho and Central Oahu after this, and we compile the feedback. What are sort of the next steps? So we have these public recorded in-person events, and then we also again have a website survey that we're also gathering input. So basically the staff is going to have to go through the comments and make recommended next steps to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees will have to vote in a public meeting, which is kind of where this is how these meetings also happened back in November. Our Board of Trustees had a meeting, and this was in the middle of when Governor Green was really pushing that accelerated time schedule for looking at, is condemnation going to happen, and kind of pushing this narrative that we have to have a decision by December and a deal with the Army by December. So in that context, we went to the board. We said that the governor and the state needs to be consulting with Native Hawaiians, and that OHA should help facilitate that process of having a Native Hawaiian consultation in the state's conversations. So we had this as an initial step. As Lealoha mentioned, we're also inviting folks so we can do a more in-depth Kapa'akai analysis than was done in the original EIS. And to really start the community dialogue. But you're right, there will be a next stage where OHA has to take more of a public position on what are our non-negotiables or where we want to go. Right now, we have really been through the EIS process trying to hold the military service branches and the state to their existing legal duties as far as considering all the effects, consulting with Native Hawaiians. But yes, we will have a point at which we summarize the community consultation and go before the board and make a recommendation on next steps.
I had a rough ride over here, but I'm so happy to be here. Yes, so in addition to what Lealoha and Lei shared with all of you, we are also established, right before we broke for the year, a permitted interaction group. And that's a group of trustees and critical staff members, and then the resolution or the action item that created this permitted interaction group also had added a component for a technical advisor. So really subject matter experts from the community who could lend their expertise, their ike, their networks to informing OHA's decision making on military land leases. The significance of this permitted interaction group is that it allows the trustees to meet without having to have a published or a noticed meeting. So it helps to overcome some of the sunshine law limitations so that trustees can meet with more than 2 people at a time and really pivot to meet the moment, because the conversation around military leased lands is evolving very quickly. Although we saw at the end of the year the governor pretty much articulated that we had more of a runway to negotiate and to contemplate, deliberate, to all of the necessary research and studies that would make a most informed decision or a most informed position statement when discussing the extension of military leases with the armed forces. We learned, so I'm also a member of the governor's advisory committee on military leased lands. I'm in a representative capacity for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And we had our last meeting on Friday, and at that meeting, it was surfaced that the runway for really meaningful talks that then make its way into policy is until April. So that is not a long time frame at all. And the timeline or the benchmark that makes April that deadline is the National Defense Authorizing Act. That act basically establishes the funding levels, policy initiatives, and other really important activities that the Department of Defense, in coordination with national security, will undertake for the year. Language that it's a law that gets renewed annually, has to be passed by Congress, and it provides the parameters within which the armed forces in this case have to abide. And Congress and other stakeholders at the congressional and national level are asking that language concerning Hawaii's military land leases be in draft form, ready for presentation by April. We learned from the last NDAA, and that's the acronym for this long titled bill or law, but we learned that the language nuanced itself, kept evolving, got better between April and December of last year. So while we'll want some draft language, some non-negotiables, some parameters inserted into that space or that context, we may have some additional runway to nuance or sort of get more specific on what the asks are. But I think what's really important is for the community is that means we need to hear your mana'o every chance we are in community, or even when we're not in community. I mean, we are intaking information all the time, and we are trying to be as responsive to the moment as we learn new information. And it's a responsibility of ours that we take super seriously to make transparent to all of you new information that comes to us. So like this Friday meeting, this community is the first to hear about some of the details that came out of that meeting, and a more detailed minutes of that meeting will be forthcoming as well in coordination with the governor's office. But it's important that Kanaka be at every table. And so I think the original question was, what are we doing with this information? I'm attending as many of these community meetings or listening sessions as I can so that I can take your mana'o straight to the executive office, straight to the ears of assistant secretaries who meet with this advisory commission, so that all of the ways in which our position is evolving gets heard in real time by the decision makers who are conferring with other stakeholders, both in Hawaii and on the continent. We also take your information so that it informs the permitted interaction group. And we ask for anybody who's interested in providing really technical information. So we need people who are expert in natural and cultural resources. We need people who are expert in cultural practices. We need people who are expert in settlement negotiations. We need people who are expert in archaeology. All of the things that affect our āina, especially our āina that's the military is currently using, is welcome. So there are a number of ways in which the information we're learning gets translated, and it doesn't have to wait till OHA formulates a formal position at some later point in time. I mean, even our slide, you will see that from the first time we did a briefing session to this one, mana'o that we hear that resonates, that seems to be repeated over and over again, gets integrated into the slides that we move through community. And so in some ways, everybody's voices are being shared with other voices, not just through watching YouTube and whatnot, but actually reflected in our work product. So please, my ask is that knowing this new timeline, that you tell your family, your networks, your kupuna, your keiki, your kids who are in college here and on the continent, to get really fluent and well-versed in some of these issues, and to help us inform and make sure that our position is as comprehensive and inclusive as possible. So, mahalo.
Stay right there. So we're going to have our first community beneficiary come up and speak. So hang on to that mic. Uncle Rupert, would you like to come up and say a few words? By the way, our interim chief executive officer is the former Department of Interior director under Biden, and she was the former director of the Native Hawaiian Legal Corps. So that's Summer Silva right there.
Anyway, I want to thank OHA. The keys that we got should be here on island next week. We loaded it up on a barge today, so it's coming. So anyway, what I wanted to say, we got a critical problem in our identity. In our language, there's no such person as a Hawaiian. We must remember that. Our identity is Kanaka. Only the Kanaka can bring peace and harmony to Hawaii. Not the Hawaiian now. It's a make-believe person. How you measure the blood quantum? If you get more than 6 people living in you, there's 6 different persons that represent you. But who is that person that is talking from inside of you? Okay, you may be Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, Borinque, whatever. If you got that much people in you, who is that person talking to you, for you? That's the problem we get, identity. So the only identity that is real is the Kanaka. Only the Kanaka can make things happen. That's why the keys are Kanaka's past. What we're doing is bringing the past to the present and the present to the future. So all of Kauai, you guys should be very concerned of the pace that we will set throughout Hawaii. It will come from this island. Raising the keys is an important asset to our identity. Secondly, the crime the military did in Hawaii There's no other state in the union where you can pay $1 for 65 years and be fooled. Only in Hawaii, because we is wards of the state based upon a blood quantum. A blood quantum is a patai. Same did in South Africa. Hawaii is just as equal to that. That's why you own nothing, you is nothing, and you'll never be nothing. That's how the system is made. So as from Kaneolauma, you must look at the future. It will happen beyond what a lot of these people throughout Hawaii who have taken us not seriously. So Kaneolauma has opened the door to the future. Thank you folks again for the keys. We are on that path to bring the past to the present and to the future.
Thank you, Uncle Roop. Looking for anybody else out there? Anybody want to say a few words? Come up here, sister. Right on.
Hi, aloha everyone. I am Tia Marie. I am actually from Oahu, but I have kupuna with ties to the Halele'a, Moku, and Hanalei. So I just wanted to ask for OHA specifically, and this might not be a question you can answer right now, but for OHA, does national security supersede your fiduciary and trust duties to Kanaka Maoli, people's lands and resources? So, in other words, if the U.S. military says it needs the lands for national security, will OHA be required to uphold its duty to protect our trust lands, or will OHA be required to defer to the military and the United States of America? And I'm just asking this because national security is a guise and a lie and a trick that the United States military uses very often. Events as current as Venezuela and things that we're seeing, every day. So yeah, I'm just curious on specifically what is required of OHA in their, official capacity, in the positions you folks are going to take, and in the duties you have to us if national security of America supersedes that. So yeah, that's my question.
Is this still on? Can you hear me? Thank you for the question. As we were talking earlier, OHA's duties definitely run to beneficiaries. That's who our fiduciary duties run to. Constitutionally, under statute, advocate on behalf of Native Hawaiians. So OHA always has that role, which is what we're trying to do, to elevate the voice of community. I would say that national security constrains, what are the options that are available. Because as we do know, condemnation is a power that the United States government has. And if it were to exercise it, national security is certainly under U.S. law considered a public interest, which would allow the United States to exercise that power. So I wouldn't say national security changes OHA's duties and role to represent Native Hawaiians, but I think it shapes the conversation and the options that are available to us. And that's something we're trying to be honest about in these conversations, is kind of the limitations of what we can do. But always, that's why we keep talking about Kaho'olawe and Makua and other situations where national security at the time said that these lands could never be given back. Kaho'olawe, during the first court hearing, when they didn't get a full injunction, the Navy said that their fleet readiness would be reduced 30 to 40% if they had to stop bombing Kaho'olawe. But what we see is over time there can be adjustments made. So we are always trying to, I think, hold the line along with community to push what is how the United States our military and armed services that are using our lands think about it and really try to engage in, legal action or conversation when appropriate to be like, how can we help advance this so we can get more land back? And that's what happened. Kaho'olawe, same with Makua. Originally, when the lawsuit was filed, absolutely not. We're going to have to live fire train there forever. And now we're at the point in time where we're getting Makua back. So it doesn't change our duties, but it's a constraint that we work under, I think, with the rest of the community.
I would also add, there's Makua, there's Kaho'olawe, but even more recently, there's Red Hill, right? Like for decades, the military asserted that those oil storage facilities were absolutely necessary for national security, and we saw that when it was surfaced that the harm to the environment, the harm to people and their health, and the activism that coalesced around, aloha āina, malama āina, taking care of our waters, that the conversation changed, and now we're seeing the military look for new options to satisfy its fuel needs, and so the conversation does evolve all the time, and I think OHA's duty is in the spaces where it has a voice, a representative voice for the beneficiaries, that we challenge some of those national security assumptions. I think that's one of the reasons why we're supporting and introducing the non-live fire bill, and it speaks to the idea that you can actually still accomplish national security goals and objectives without harming āina, without unnecessarily injuring, or the degree to which you injure āina and the communities who rely on that for their food production, for their water, to meet other unmet housing needs. And I think we also know that the way in which warfare happens these days doesn't require on the ground training all the time. Now we have very sophisticated weaponry, and we also know that the military is trying to get sophisticated in its logistical, like its ability to move ammunitions or things that don't require actually live fire, very injurious, high munition kind of activities. So that conversation is happening too. So I agree with Lei that we can't ignore the national security conversation, but we can address it head on and make sure that we're operating with as much integrity about the conversation as we can on behalf of Hawaiian beneficiaries.
Thank you so much. I hope that answered your question. Next up, we're going to be calling on Punohu, but just letting you guys know on the board level, what's important is to get it in front of our community so they can use it and understand what's happening. So next up, Punohu.
Aloha, Punohu Kekaha III. Since we're on national security, what about national security for Ko Hawaiʻi Āina? Because right now we're kind of stuck in a situation where, in my understanding, I feel like the bullseye over here, they get their military and it's kind of causing us the harm, the beneficiaries the harm. So what about our national security?
But, we care deeply about, when we say the people who call Hawaii home, and beyond national security, food security, water, and āina well-being, are just moving through the world feeling safe and like we can aloha one another. I will say that our desire to want to educate community and present all the things that we're learning from multiple stakeholders, sometimes I can imagine that it sometimes gets presented in a way that appears as if we are champions or aligning ourselves with some of the information that we're sharing out. We have a duty to make sure that, or we believe we have a duty to make sure that everybody in the community is operating with the same level of information and the same access to what we're learning in real time all the time. And so, notwithstanding some of these bullet points and information sharing that happens, please know, like I don't know any trustee and I don't know any OHA employee who isn't absolutely aligned with what you just said, that our health, our security interests, that what Hawaii needs is paramount. And what we're doing, what we're charged to do, is to navigate that space between what Hawaii needs and what the state is, the kind of decisions it's making around what it needs and what the federal government is saying about its needs. We're navigating that space, and we're making sure to bring all the mana'o from our beneficiary community into those realms. So we're aligned, I guess. The bottom line is we're aligned.
I guess I just wanted to say, I think we should navigate more based off of the truth, though, because a lot of what's being said is, in my eyes, is not, it's not based off of the truth. We're kind of like beating around the bush over here. But another one of my questions I wanted to ask, because I wanted to know exactly where OHA stands. And this question, I hope you guys can answer this. It's just a simple yes or no question. Does OHA acknowledge that Hawaii came under U.S. control without a ratified treaty of cession?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, mahalo. I just wanted to make sure. Because occupation cannot be ignored. And right now we're in total occupation, yeah. So just wanted to put that out there for the record.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think trustee can speak also for the Board of Trustees that the response to that question is a resounding yes. Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, Roslyn.
Aloha, my name is Roslyn Nicole Manava Akia Malama. I'm married to a Cummings. My Malama Namu Ohana actually has been in this area from time immemorial. Our family was the last to leave Nualolo, Napali. And my grandfather free dive Ahi in between ihau and the channel of Kauaʻi. So there's a lot of native practices that I can speak on, but I do want to just kind of reiterate with you guys that you didn't really go too much detail into PMRF in comparison to a lot of places. Is that because of research, or is it because of the EIS not coming out?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay, so upon what I want the public to know and understand of what I went and learned, because if you look up any EIS done on the west side, they use our Benjamin Namu Royal Patent 5362-8137. We are heirs of Keliahu Nui, Komali III. And the only reason why they use it, it wasn't because of that. It's because when you have a large vested property like that, they're going to want to make like there's no heirs to that. But if you look back at what you're stating in the 1840 Constitution or Kanawai, if you look really good at the verbiage, there's two main words that we carry forward today that's not spoken is nakanaka, that's stated in there, and then ho'oilina, which makes us heirs. And there's nothing in the Hawaiian Kingdom that states beneficiaries. And another thing is, you were talking about the Ali Trust. I did a lot of research on that, and it seems that it was actually more written as a will versus a trust. So I was hoping that what I want to kind of see out of it is I kind of want to see land transfer titles, because in the beginning when you do research on PMRF, it states that they received it from Kekaha Ag, and a lot of the patents on this side of the island will say that it's a 1920 land grant. So obviously that would be a question of title transfer, and then that would be a really heavy question when you talk about vested rights, because we are talking about inherited rights that come from our kupuna till now. And so what's happening at PMF is kind of limited, because I grew up going there a lot. And then it got limited to the point where now we kind of see it where nonprofits have more gatekeeping roles. And you're bringing up, and I say that because where does it state that we have to go through a process to be known as what's called lineal descendants and cultural descendants? That goes through SHPD. which I have a problem with that because if you look at Shipti, then you look at Burial Council, there is a conflict for me of what's bias and what's kind of prejudice of interest in that. And then Mana Plains also, I want to make it known to the public that Mana is actually known as the oldest Tahitian village. That's a thing that comes through our Mana o Mo'olelo of our Ohana. My tutu lady lived in Mana at one point. And so a lot of their mo'olelo comes and carries on through that. So that's one thing. Then you have the story of Nohili. And so he didn't mention anything of what activities take place over at Nohili, which is missile testing. So is missile testing different from live fire because of the type of, what do you call that? Not ammunition, but the type of practice being made? Is that what it is?
I don't think we... And excuse me if it wasn't clear. I don't think we said there isn't live fire testing at PMRF. We just didn't talk about it as much.
Okay.
But I don't think there's live fire into the area, but there's definitely live fire. Or let me say, I'm not actually sure if it's live fire at PMRF.
Okay. So I guess
I know Kaula, they bomb,
Correct.
and that is from PMRF. But I'm not in the weeds on PMRF.
Do you think OHO is going to do a little research in the connection between that?
Yes, and I'm actually not, like I said, that one hasn't been publicized, so I've been on the team that's looked at all the final EISs for like Pōhakuloa and the Oahu military leases, but our compliance team, our lead archaeologist has been the one who's looked at the EIS the most in depth for Kauaʻi for the draft one.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought up archaeologists. So another issue that I was trying to bring to DOI is this. So if you look at who permits archaeologists in the state of Hawaii, that comes from SHPT. Then the archaeologists, from my understanding and research, there's 3 main companies that do a lot of archaeological research on this island. They don't actually have DCCA license to operate and function as companies that they have. So a lot of their companies don't have license through the state. They operate their company under their archaeological permit. It's crazy, look it up. And another one is that now you have these archaeologists becomes experts, right? They don't have Native Hawaiian like genealogy or background, so they're experts. But in most cases here on Kauaʻi, you find that they rely on any type of research and anything that's within government documentation, but they don't respect the mokuaha or ikepapalua that we carry. And so a lot of times we go through loopholes as mo'opuna, where they would tie us into the lineal descendancy and cultural descendancy. And this thing can happen for like 3-4 years that you sit into. So what I'm trying to say is in relationship to PMRF is how do you relate the archaeological reports that you're stating in Kapa'akai? Because yesterday at the planning meeting, we found out from one of the permittee or requests for permit that they charge $20,000 for a Kapa'akai analysis, and the same archaeologist offers to charge them $10,000 for just monitoring. So how is this not a conflict of interest? You want me to repeat it?
Yes.
Okay, so it is said that a Kapa'akai analysis costs $20,000. And the same archaeologists or other archaeologists will offer a $10,000 charge for them to be able to be on the property if it's required for an archaeologist to be on the property to monitor the job site. How is it not a conflict of interest?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but I don't really understand the question.
Okay, so if you have the archaeologist hired as a Kapa'akai analysis,
yes,
right, they have to do the Kapa'akai analysis and what's required in there. And then they come out to monitor the site because it's required them to monitor the site. How is that not conflicting as they're paying 2 different roles because they're licensed or they're not licensed, they're permitted through SHPT. So I'm trying to tie in DOI, like basically this is federal laws, right?
I just want to clarify the question. Maybe I think I know what you're asking, but is it you're saying that the archaeologist who's doing the Kapa'akai analysis is recommending monitoring for the project and then is the archaeological monitor on the project?
Correct.
Okay.
So because you guys brought it up, right? You mentioned kapaka analysis and you mentioned archaeological, right? So for me, because it's a trust duty, there's a certain type of standard that needs to be met to the beneficiaries, right? And it comes down to like compliance and what is public disclosure, I guess.
I think that in this process, because I'm a compliance advocate, so I deal with these issues a lot, and I don't think there seems to be sometimes a lot of conflicts of interest in a lot of different ways, and I don't know that there's a simple solution to it immediately. I think there's probably things that we could do to address those insufficiencies, but because I see in other ways there are some other conflicts of interest just in the fact that, sometimes the parties that are asking for the Kauaʻi analysis and the companies they use, like they want to get paid, so there seems to be a little bit of conflict of interest in general in some of the process, but it's kind of just the best that we have at this point. And I know that there is limits, especially on island, with archaeologists and those available, and they've tried to do some programs to increase the amount of archaeologists and reach out for Native Hawaiians to go into that field as well, and I think that that's also one of the barriers that exist. I don't think there's simple solutions, but I do think I could acknowledge, and if you guys understand it now, that there does seem to be some conflicts of interest here and there in some of this work, and it is something that maybe we could try to address in different ways, but yeah.
I guess I just mentioned it just because it's going to be something that relates to the EIS and the leases. So it's going to be something that's going to be in the EIS and related to our cultural practices. So that's kind of important to me. Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we understand that there's 100 different practices. So I'll just go ahead and email what those practices are. So mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation too, as well. Maybe we can use her in one of our committees. Anybody else? It's almost the 8 o'clock hour. I don't want to keep everybody here so long. Weather's really bad, but I guess, here we go. He has one more.
Sorry. Kalamai, one more question. So again, I'm Punohu Kekaulua. This is just a question for OHA. How can OHA fulfill fiduciary duties to beneficiaries while refusing to acknowledge unresolved basis of authority over the lands it administers?
So is this a question about governance?
Here, I'll just repeat. Fiduciary duties.
Yes.
So I'll repeat. How can OHA fulfill fiduciary duties to beneficiaries while refusing to acknowledge the unresolved basis of authority over the lands it administers?
Okay, so I will try and answer that question in the way that I understand it. So the fact of the matter is OHA as an entity is we are created by state law, state and federal law. So we are a creature of state and federal law. But I would say that a lot of the rights that we try to uphold and enforce, again, they're under state and federal law, but some of them do derive from kingdom law. There's a lot of Native Hawaiian cultural practices and protections under the Constitution and other statutes that directly arise from kingdom law and have perpetuated makainana rights in the land and access rights and public access rights across land. So I would say our role is to operate, enforce our fiduciary responsibilities, which arise under state law. But I think a large portion of our responsibility is to protect and preserve Native Hawaiian rights, including those that arise originally from kingdom law.
How about has OHA ever refused conditioned or formally objected to the return of military lands due to unexploded ordinances or contamination? And if not, why has OHA accepted that risk on behalf of beneficiaries?
I don't think OHA has to date been in that role. The return of Koho'olawe to the state has language that at some future point that land should be transferred to a Native Hawaiian governing entity, but that is undetermined, and it goes back to the unresolved nature of our governance claims. So OHA wasn't, to my knowledge, directly involved in any of the negotiations around the return of Koho'olawe. And right now, with the proposed return of Makua, that is, again, something that is still under negotiation. We have not been directly consulted, but we are recommending or asking that there be commitments related to cleaning up the land before it is returned. But there is community in that area who does want to take on that kuleana of trying to clean up that land if it is returned in a state that it needs more cleanup.
Okay, and then I got one more question. If OHA cannot acknowledge occupation, cannot refuse unsafe land, and cannot produce beneficiary consent, on what basis does it claim to be protecting Native Hawaiian interests?
So I think Leigh's prior answer was that we don't currently have inventory that contains, unexploded ordinances or things that were inherited from the military that make it unsafe. So it's my understanding that our current land inventory, the trust assets that we steward and manage, until a recognized government is formally established and we can transfer those titles to that entity that our beneficiaries collectively decide, it behooves us, I think it behooves the community for us to hold those lands and ensure that they are well cared for, like by Kanaka, work with community, have those kind of partnerships, which we do have, to help steward the lands that are part of our inventory and to, malama them until we decide as a people sort of what the next governance model will look like. But I want to address your other two conditions because I think we do acknowledge that the illegal overthrow did not, we have unrelinquished claims. We identify all the lands that we hold as government and crown, as kingdom and crown land. So we have a shared understanding of our history. We're not opposed on that. We're not in receipt of land that would be unsafe or have been transferred to us from the military. And I think you mentioned a third condition that I just want to make sure that you know exactly where OHA stands on those 3 points. So if I address two, I think you named one more, and we just want to make sure that we're answering all those.
Just for confirmation,
Yeah.
OHA does acknowledge that we're in occupation?
OHA does acknowledge that we have unrelinquished claims, unrelinquished,
I get
unrelinquished claims.
Okay. And then when you refer to land inventory, what are you referring to exactly?
So thank you for the question. It's basically the lands that we have that we hold in trust for the beneficiaries. I'm using a
Are we
term.
referring to the Great Mahele?
No, I literally mean the lands. I'm sorry, and I want to make sure that I understand the question. But when I refer to OHA's land inventory, all I'm referring to is the lands that we currently oversee, manage, steward for the benefit of beneficiaries. Yeah.
But I would add, and we kind of went through this, we do have duties that run to all the Crown and government lands on behalf of beneficiaries.
So yeah, that's what I mean by not acknowledging the truth. We're going off of something that's not factual. You know what I mean? Because the Great Mahele is the land inventory. And we need to stick to that to uphold the truth of Ko Hawaii Pai Aina. But mahalo, you guys.
Thank you. Okay, we can take one more speaker, and then after this we have food not like stay out too late, but get food out there for all you guys, before we make our trek home. So I guess I'm going, the last speaker, Noa Mau.
Hi, Noa Mau Espirito. I'd like to say thank you for you guys put on this meeting. So I just like to bring up something about the military lease. I feel like they're on issue. Still to this day, Congress never fully signed off on Section 7 on the Admissions Act. You can pull them up right now on the government website, and still Congress never signed off for the boundaries and for the provisions of the Admissions Act. And therefore, I sit thinking how the state can approve leases if, statehood, if Congress never signed off on statehood still yet. I just wanted to bring that up about the military leases.
Anybody want to offer up any comments? Signature of the
blanks also have a date of approval with Congress for approve the provisions of the act and for approve the boundaries for the state of Hawaii. And,
I will promise to take a look afterwards at what you're referring to. I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. I will note. Yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking around, scanning the crowd. Just want to say thank you, and I appreciate everyone's time to be here. Thank you so much. A lot of it, information, and things will, get better as we get more information. So I'm sure you guys are going to have one report at the end, and before we hand anything in. But the bottom line is we don't make these decisions, but we want to try and be at the table to make sure that we can, make sure we speak for our beneficiaries. So thank you for your time tonight, and I hope you guys like this format, kind of more personal. And so, but one thing is there's only one trustee here, so it's perfect. It's perfect. We can do a lot more. We're not violating any sunshine laws or anything like this, but for the end of our meeting, you guys can go enjoy food. So thank you all for being there. If you guys have any questions, we'll be around. You guys can talk story. Thank you so much. Mahalo.